Okay. All right. In the last lesson, we were basically focused on the beginning of Christianity. It was a short lesson. If you felt like it was like, I don't need to watch it, well, you definitely need to go back and watch that one because it kind of sets a tone for what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time, because especially since Rome turns into a Christian empire over time. Definitely not in the beginning. So, but now we're going to get back into just the Roman Empire, and I will apologize up front. I am not going to delve deep into just all the emperors and all the intrigues and stuff like that. I'll get into some of it, though. So, and this is the lesson where I'll get into some of it. But again, at this point, I'll just say, if you're feeling like Mr. Harrison isn't giving you enough, you'd like to know more, you have all the power in the world to start going and looking this up and looking up a lot of these stories on your own. It is fun. It is interesting. It's fascinating. It's also a bit disturbing in some cases. So, anyways, now that Rome is an empire, we do get this idea of dynasties in place. Usually when we use the term dynasties in class, we're referring to the Chinese. But remember, we first talked about dynasties with the Egyptians, and a dynasty is a period of time where one family is in control. So in this case, like the first family that's there is the Julio-Claudians. That's the family of like Julius Caesar and Augustus and things like that. Over time, it transfers over to a family called the Flavians, and then there's more families after that. Let's just put it this way. There are quite a few dynasties over the next 400 years or so, 400 to 500 years of Roman history. Now, so even though I've been basically saying how the Pax Romana was this time where it was good to be Roman. Well, yes, it was. It doesn't mean there weren't problems. Even though Rome was a great place to be at the time, it doesn't mean that you weren't having some major problems. And that is mainly because, well, you get some crazy emperors. You have some good ones and you have some crazy ones. For instance, like when it comes to the Julio-Claudians, Augustus is viewed as a very good emperor. I gave you an example earlier in an earlier, I almost said episode, but an earlier video lesson or an earlier lesson that he would do things that could be definitely viewed as quite tyrannical. But for the most part, he's viewed as this good emperor. Then you get to Tiberius, who's kind of seen as this secluded, kind of vengeful emperor. I guess you could put it that way. And then after that, you get into guys like, well, Nero and Caligula. Excuse me. These guys definitely not viewed as good. Well, in between there, you also have an emperor that's viewed actually as a very good emperor, a guy named Claudius. And he was a surprisingly good emperor because he was viewed as actually very slow of wit, I guess you could say, but it turned out to be one of the best emperors Rome had in the beginning, kind of stabilized things a bit. Because you kind of needed the stability between Caligula and Nero. Caligula became, if I'm getting this right, Caligula came before Claudius and then Nero came after Claudius. But when I say namely Caligula and Nero here on the slide, it's all because they do some pretty crazy stuff. I'll talk about their crazy stuff in the next slide. I just use some pictures to represent it. But after the death of Nero, you get into the Flavian dynasty, and again, they start off actually pretty good, but then they have some people that just kind of go wacky towards the end as well. Excuse me. I shouldn't say wacky. You basically get an emperor named, oh wow, I just forgot his name. Oh, well, okay, sorry. Let's put it this way. It's an emperor that the elites all hated, so they made sure that history looked at him in an awful way, but the people seem to love him. But he gets assassinated, and all of a sudden you get what's called the Five Good Emperors, where all of a sudden you get a guy put in place named Nerva, isn't emperor for very long. But he starts a thing that lasts for essentially 5 generations of emperors, where he doesn't pick a family member. So this isn't a dynasty. And this is one of those things where we look at it and say, this is good because it isn't a dynasty. Like, you don't expect, that kid isn't expecting to become the next emperor, you could say. In most cases, they're not. In this case, you're picking the next best guy for the job. Like Nerva picks Trajan because Trajan definitely shows some very good abilities to become a good emperor. And by the way, Trajan is definitely viewed as one of the greatest emperors ever, one of the greatest Roman leaders ever. Like, it is during his reign that Rome reaches the height of its power and prosperity and sense of safety and security and just complete and utter domination. Hadrian is able to continue that. So is Antoninus Pius. Things start going a bit downhill for Marcus Aurelius, but because of his leadership capabilities, he's able to kind of see Rome through kind of a tough time, and actually Rome is still doing quite well by the time that he passes away. Turns out that actually goes into a bit of a dynasty there, because his son then becomes the next emperor, a guy named Commodus, and Commodus kind of takes Rome and throws it down the tubes. Again, I'm not going to go into that much. You guys can look that up on your own. But Commodus, or if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, there's a reason why, well, they picked this time period and Claudius is the bad guy. So, but just what I'm trying to just show you here is that they get into these dynasties in the beginning with Augustus. It takes about 100 some odd years. They get to this point. It's like, no, let's get away from the dynasties. Let's go into this, picking the next best guy for the job. And you get this idea of the 5 good emperors. But after that, it goes back to dynasties, and it just stays with dynasties. And I used the term Band-Aid fixes earlier when I was talking about problems in the Republic. In a lot of cases, you get a lot of Band-Aid fixes with the emperors, but it's just never enough. It's just, Rome is, the cracks are there. And in another lesson, either the next one or one soon, we're going to get into just the cracks in the empire itself that really they inherited from the Republic in a lot of cases. So, okay, here. I like showing these 2 pictures just to kind of go over kind of the 2 ideas I just talked about. The idea of, like, there's emperors that did a really good job, and then there was emperors that were bygone crazy. So, looking at the right picture first, that's actually a picture of Hadrian's Wall. That's on the island of Britain today. This is a point where when Hadrian gets into power, he sets up this idea like, well, right, we're going to kind of build walls around the empire. We've hit our furthest extent. We're going to, Rome ends here type thing. And this idea like civilization is on this side of the wall, not civilization is on the other side of the wall. Those weird people over there type thing. And he did a pretty good job of just making sure Rome was just set, and at the same time, Rome did really well domestically inside the empire. So basically just represents this idea of just the actions of one of the good emperors, you could say. On the left-hand side, you see a nice painting of, the famous Nero is playing the fiddle, I guess in this case a harp, but the fiddle while Rome burns. And there's basically a bunch of stories that goes behind this, and I'll just lead up to it here. First, I'm going to start with Caligula, because Caligula is before Nero. With Caligula, this guy was just seen as so dang crazy that he would fire his generals. It was said that he fired a bunch of his generals and then named his horse consul of all the Roman armies. That if you just looked at him wrong, he would have you executed. He viewed himself definitely as a god and declared war on the sea, declared war on Neptune or Poseidon. And then once his soldiers had gone into the ocean and killed enough fish, he declared victory. It's just some really weird things. Again, I'm just introducing this, so if it interests you, go look up the craziness of Caligula and just get the idea of who this person is and what he did. Then you get to Nero. Nero was, I guess you could say, more sane, but still just like this spoiled brat of a kid. But it was, at least in this picture, was said that he wanted to build a new palace. So, and there's a bunch of people, he wanted their land, but these people are actually a little bit too powerful in Rome to just say, I'm going to take it from you. So it said that he burned Rome down. Now, he blamed it on the Christians, easy people, he blamed it on the scapegoats type thing, saying that they are the ones that burned Rome down. But basically history looks back on this, and it's not one of those things like we know for sure, but it's like, well, Rome burnt down, could have been just an accident. He blames on the Christians, but maybe he started it because he does build a gigantic palace on top of all that stuff that did burn down. Then he'd throw gigantic parties in that new palace that he builds for himself. And in many cases, he would light those parties with humans, meaning that he would wrap Christians in like candles, light them on fire while they're still alive. Of course, he'd gag them so their screams didn't ruin the party, and just throw a party with all these kind of burning human beings around him. Again, Christians. Just one of those things I referenced to earlier where I'd say, like, yeah, there's some pretty bad stuff that happens to the Christians because they just kind of mess things up a bit. And they don't believe the way everybody else does. So, there's a heck of a lot more stories I can go into this, but I'm going to just leave it at this point right here. Because now we're also as this is all going on, and even the Pax Romana is going on, we're seeing some problems come into play. I already mentioned one of these, and that is Christianity, the monotheistic religion, versus the established. I say mythological religions here. That's because we call them mythological today, because really no one believes it anymore. But I should really say Christianity versus the established polytheistic religions is the way I should put this. So, again, long-held systems of belief are being challenged. That's still there. Inherited from, you could say, the Roman Republic. Things are still happening where you get a huge poor class. But in this case, the way to deal with that isn't, again, it's just Band-Aid fixes all over the place. In order to gain more power, in order to always make sure that the people love you, and especially the poor people who can vote, well, you get this Roman term called bread and circuses, meaning that if you can just keep them fed, give them free food, and give them free entertainment, they'll love you forever. And so they really won't care about what you're doing or how maybe you're kind of ruining things from the inside out, as long as you just placate them with this stuff. And so basically they do, it's not just the idea of like free bread and free entertainment. You get things like, I'll give you free land, free housing, just free this, free that, all these different groups of people to kind of make sure that the people on your side, you garner power because you have that public opinion behind them. And emperors, that was not lost on the emperors. Make the people happy with you, and no matter what any of the educated elites say, whether they're kind of greedy themselves or they're altruistic, you can kind of shut them up. So then you get to this idea of something where Rome did very well with this during the Republic and almost beginning empire, but starts becoming a major problem over time, and that's just their cosmopolitan society, meaning their diversity in a way. They're a huge empire. They have tons of different peoples and cultures within this empire. And in the beginning, when Rome would conquer a place, they did actually a pretty good job of just saying, hey, keep what you got, but you can feel Roman too. And that starts going away. All of a sudden people start feeling like their cultural identity or where they're from is much more important than being Roman. And that really hurts the idea of this cohesiveness where people can work together like that they have during the Pax Romana. That starts going away. And it's caused by a lot of different things. I'm not going to get way into this. When I say it's caused by a lot of different things, it's like it's from both sides type stuff. Kind of this elitism on one side saying, well, if you're not this person of this type of thinking, then you're definitely never going to be good and you'll never really be a true Roman. You definitely get kind of the elites of Italy that think that way, and Greece. Whereas, you have all these people thinking like, well, I like my way of doing things. Being Roman is nice, but when push comes to shove, I'm more this than I'm that. Like I'm more German than I'm Roman, or I'm what else am I thinking? Well, I'm more fill in the blank than Roman. And that starts kind of fraying things a bit. So this causes a lot of unrest and civil disorder, and the emperors, well, some emperors do well with it, where they're actually able to bring some cohesiveness back, where people are like, yes, you're a good leader. I actually enjoy being Roman now because of you. Thanks for helping me out or doing what we thought was right or whatever in our certain circumstances. But in a lot of cases, emperors are like, what? You're not happy? Well, I'll beat you down. So, and that for the most part, that didn't help out much. That caused a lot of embitterment that sometimes could play out in future generations. So, and it's just, again, those cracks that began hundreds of years before in the Republic are becoming much, much, much more set in place at this point as the empire is starting to go forward, especially as we get towards the end of the Pax Romana and into the crisis years of the 200s AD, basically. Which I'm not going to talk much on. I am sorry. I'm going to completely roughshod right over people like Aurelian and Diocletian in this unit, so I apologize. Again, feel free to look this up on your own. So, other major problems, though, is that armies really aren't Roman any longer. Over time, remember in the beginning, Rome had this just core armies where they would volunteer. They were definitely there for protecting family and republic and things like that. Even after the Marius reforms, they were still very, very Roman armies. Even when you were utilizing peoples that weren't necessarily like born in Rome, Romans or Italians, they still viewed themselves as joining the Roman army and very, very Roman. But now, towards the end of the empire, just there's this shift where it's just you're not getting as many as these Romans. Now, there's a big reason why, and it has a lot to do with just the plantation systems and things like that. And just the disappearance, you could say, of the middle class over time. I don't have time to go into that, and it's probably too much for you guys. I shouldn't say too much for you guys, but just basics versus if you guys want to look more into it, you can look more into it. So the basic idea here is that all of a sudden you have, especially a lot of people that are joining the Roman army that aren't even, they don't view themselves as Romans. They're just a hired hand and like, hey, I'll fight for Rome as long as I'm paid type thing. And, they don't really have this allegiance to Rome as much, and the one ethnic group that really becomes like the big one that really is the core of the Roman armies, especially for like the last 100 years of its existence before the fall of the Roman Empire, are the Germans. There are people, the Romans have been fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years across the Rhine and Danube rivers. And now they actually become the core, and the Romans rely on them to kind of provide for their military. So in a way, Rome is paying the very same people to defend them that could eventually be the same ones that are going to overwhelm them and attack them if they're not paid. So. But yeah, all of a sudden these armies again are not really loyal to the. When I say loyal to the Republic, I'm talking about loyal to the Republic as in the Republic, and then you can replace Republic. They're not really loyal to the Empire either, at least towards the end of the Empire. Now during Augustus's time, yes, very loyal to the Empire. Pax Romana, very loyal to the Empire there too. But right now I'm talking more about like the last 150 years of Rome's existence. So I guess I should have this up there. I'll bring all that up. But you get to a point where in the very end of Rome, I'm covering a gambit of over 100 years here, I'm sorry, but at the very end of Rome, they get to this point where they just feel like, well, we'll just bribe our enemies to guard us against our other enemies. Like, for instance, the Romans get attacked over and over and over again by the Goths, by various Gothic tribes. And so they think, well, let's pay the Goths to stay on their side of the border and watch us against anybody else that comes in, like, say, who does come in, the Huns later on. It just turns out that the Huns are a bit too much for the Goths. When that happens, I'll actually talk about that in a little bit, but you just need to know that that becomes a bad deal. Like, when you're paying someone who's a potential enemy to be your guardian, that's a recipe for disaster. So, now the last thing is no consistent leadership. Like, when I say no consistent leadership, during the Pax Romana, even when you'd have a crazy emperor like Nero or Caligula, the ship of state still sailed forward pretty well. Like the government itself actually did all right, even with these crazy people at the head. But when basically things were looking more and more to where the emperor just really had to take an iron fist on things, if you had a good emperor, things were all right. When you had a bad emperor, everything went to heck. And there wasn't a consistency there, meaning that it was like good, bad, 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 good, bad, bad, bad. And then you just get tons of assassinations. Like, this seems to happen with all not just Rome, but just throughout world history. Just that lust for power, this idea of just really just that greed and desire for power starts into all these assassinations, whatever you want to bring into it. Yes, there's tons of stories that goes into this, but tons of assassinations. Like, for instance, there's one year, it's called the Year of the Five Emperors, where there are 5 emperors because 4 of them get assassinated. Anyways, and it almost becomes like it's a normal thing to be assassinated at some point. Someone's going to get jealous of your power and assassinate you when they can. People. And that really does not help out for a stable Rome, and is a major factor for the fall later on. So, anyways, but these are some of the growing problems of Rome going from republic to empire, but definitely the problems you see in the empire that are just the foundations are just cracking big time. And especially towards the end of the empire, Rome really seems like this entity is just there just because it's always been there. Like, it's just like, well, it's Rome, right? Well, what is Rome? I don't know. So, anyways, I hope this is making sense. I apologize. I'm trying to be basic with it, but still trying to explain the concept of Rome is crumbling from the inside out is the basic idea here. So, and it's a process that goes over hundreds of years, and I'm skipping all the stories. I apologize. So some stories I definitely need to get into, though, are things like this guy Constantine, which I will talk about in the next video, because this video has already gone quite long enough. Okay, so I'll see you in the next one.